When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Welcome to the Monopoly Report. The Monopoly Report is dedicated to analyzing the big issues impacting the global advertising economy. I'm Alan Chappell, outside counsel and fractional CPO to a bunch of tech companies, and am the principal analyst at the Chappell Regulatory Insider, which is a monthly report that focuses on privacy, antitrust, and other regulations impacting digital media worldwide. You can find a link to a sample copy of the Chappell Regulatory Insider in the show notes. This week is a special episode. I'm sharing an interview between Tony Ficarrotta, who is the General Counsel of the NAI, and Tom Kemp, who, of course, is the Executive Director of CalPrivacy. The interview took place as part of the NAI Annual Summit in Washington, D.C. on May 14th, 2026. As regular listeners to this podcast know, the NAI is a trade association composed of ad tech companies and others who engage in network advertising. The NAI has been around for over 25 years. Now, CalPrivacy has been incredibly active in terms of regulating data brokers and ad tech companies. I've already written extensively on CalPrivacy, so I will resist the temptation to do so here. One more thing. Many of you know this already, but I'm the board chair of the NAI. Without further ado, here's Tony Ficarrotta's Fireside Chat with Tom Kemp.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for day two of the summit. As Alan said, we are joined by Tom Kemp, the Executive Director of CalPrivacy. Tom, thank you so much for taking time to be at our summit this morning and to share your insights and perspectives on your leadership at CalPrivacy. I'm Tony Ficarrotta, NAI's General Counsel. And I want to dive right in. We have so much to talk about. CalPrivacy has been so busy, but I would like to start, Tom, by asking you to speak a little bit about your background and your kind of career arc to getting to the head of CalPrivacy. And I'll have some questions for you along the way, but I'd like you to be able to introduce yourself a little more thoroughly.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, and thanks for inviting me. And Alan, thanks for that. You set the bar really high right there, so I don't know if this will be the most consequential discussion today. We've got another great person presenting from the agency, Liz Allen, on the drop system, and so she'll set the bar for the agency as opposed to myself. So I've been in this job for like 14, 15 months. So I haven't come from government before. I've historically been an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I actually was a chief marketing officer for a tech company that I helped co-found. We took that public. And then for over a dozen years, I founded a cybersecurity company, raised money from some of the largest VCs and most well-known VCs in the Valley, built the company to over 500 people, over 150 million in bookings. And in the end, we were acquired by Thoma Bravo. So co-founded a company that went public, and then the other one was bought by a PE firm. And so I certainly understand the innovation economy, certainly understand marketing, having been a chief marketing officer in the company that was able to go public, created hundreds of jobs. So definitely understand the impact of rules and regulations on innovation and forming companies. Had to go through GDPR compliance in 18 or 16 or something like that. So I've walked maybe not a mile in your shoes, but a few laps in your shoes as it relates to going through privacy regimes and having to meet the obligations. And then since then, that was in kind of in the 2018-19 timeframe, after my company was acquired, just really focused on policy and was able to volunteer for Prop 24 in California. And in effect, I was the chief marketing officer for that campaign. And that was really the first time that privacy was put forth to the voters. And very pleased that 9.3 million people voted for it. That's a top 10 vote getter in any election in any state in the history of the United States. So it just tells you that there is a pent-up demand and interest for privacy. And then got the privacy and policy bug, and then started working with local state Senator Josh Becker. We first tried a bill that would extend the concept of what a data broker is, which would probably, if that passed, would incorporate probably some of the large tech companies to also be registered as data brokers. That got killed. So we tried that path. Then the next year, proposed to State Senator Becker the concept of the Delete Act, and fought a very tough battle, got that passed and signed by the governor. And then historically, I've also been an angel investor since my company was acquired. So I've invested in the past about 16, 18 AI-related companies in Silicon Valley. So I've always had a pretty strong background in AI, so I proposed a AI transparency law, which was the first of its kind that was signed. Along the way, wrote a book. And then when this opportunity came up to actually run an agency, I decided to jump at the opportunity, and here I am right now.
I had a few follow-up questions about a couple things that you said. So you said you caught the policy bug. Can you expand on what really caught your interest in working on tech policy? You know, having been on the operator side, working on entrepreneurship, running a company, what generated your interest in that and pulled you so strongly in that direction?
Well, my cybersecurity company, we sold to 60% of the Fortune 50. And so we were oftentimes involved in being acquired and being implemented right after a very significant breach had occurred. So I definitely gained a significant amount of appreciation for the fact that a lot of companies have radioactive material that needs to be better, not only better secured, but there needs to be governance and who actually has rights over that data. And so that was kind of one area of interest. The other thing is that I saw that a lot of policy was being driven by people that kind of didn't understand the technology or didn't have my perspective in it as well. And then also I saw the fact that that oftentimes civil society groups or policymakers didn't know how to market their policies that they were trying to do. And having been in Silicon Valley and been kind of a pirate like Alan showed from a marketing perspective and trying to raise awareness and visibility, and even, thinking like, well, hey, maybe you can even try to be an influencer to gain attention and raise awareness and kind of put yourself in that position for specific policies. That those were kind of the lessons that I learned that I applied, as well as kind of what drove and motivated me to really follow through on trying to raise the bar in terms of adding guardrails for not only for our personal information, but also when it comes to artificial intelligence and other technologies.
And it's not just that you caught the bug. I mean, you really dove in. So you were a full-time volunteer for Prop 24. You mentioned that you wrote a book. Can you tell us what your book is, what it's about, and why you decided to invest that level of time and energy into tech policy to kind of write a book about it?
Yeah, I thought that most of the books, which are excellent, like Zuboff's book, were written more from an academic perspective.
And that's the Age of Surveillance Capitalism?
Yes,
yep.
Exactly. And some of the other ones. And so I kind of felt that someone that actually had been in Silicon Valley that kind of understood the Silicon Valley ecosystem of raising venture capital, trying to find product market fit, what drove and motivated some of the companies that are now the most significant companies in the history of the world. I thought that would be kind of lending my perspective to that. And then also I wanted to write a book that you could hand your uncle or a family friend who wasn't a technologist, that kind of explained what was going on and just try to raise awareness for, not only the upside, but some of the downsides of having concentration of power in a small number of companies. Obviously, privacy is a big theme, but it's not the only theme. I talk about artificial intelligence. I talk about algorithmic amplification and addiction. And then a big undercurrent is antitrust and monopolies. But obviously in my role, I'm not executive director of my book. I'm executive director of the California Consumer Privacy Act that's more narrowly focused on privacy, and CCPA is not an antitrust law. So I stick to my knitting. I stick to my swim lane, which is privacy as it relates to protecting the rights of Californians and explaining the business obligations to folks such as yourself.
No, that's really helpful. And I'm wondering if you could bring it to a point. What would you say your book is about? Like if you were to give a couple of, maybe like a paragraph answer, because I think, many folks in this audience haven't read your book. And I know that, I appreciate your distinction between your role as head of an agency and a private author, but I do think it's a very interesting book.
Well, thank you. You must have been the copy that was sold. So
it was on some bestseller list or other.
I was wondering that at one sale that I had over the last 12 months, besides my parents and my aunts and uncles, and I have a whole box of them at home, so I don't know what I'm going to do with them. So I think, look, historically in the United States, we've had large companies like Standard Oil, AT&T, but the fundamental difference is that Standard Oil didn't know everything about you. And that's what we have with the current set of companies. They kind of know everything about you. And then the other thing is that having grown up in Detroit, and kind of being there at the epicenter of the second industrial revolution, and then moving to California and starting my career at Oracle, where the third industrial revolution was going, and participating in that as an entrepreneur, and then obviously seeing that we're now heading to the fourth industrial revolution, that the companies that are now dominating the third industrial revolution, that I didn't, in the book, I thought that they had kind of a set of unfair advantages to also dominate the fourth industrial revolution. And we hadn't previously seen that. We've seen, Standard Oil get broken up. We saw what happened to the car companies. AT&T got broken up. So yeah, a lot of it was about, antitrust. So I just wanted to raise awareness that, what the downside is of having such concentration of power. But this is all academic. That has nothing to do with with what I'm doing right now, which is privacy. No, I'm just joking. There is some. I learned a lot, in researching that book and writing about it. But obviously, I have to stick to my knitting, which is the actual statute itself.
No, thanks for taking a detour there to tell a little bit more about your book. I do appreciate the kind of longer arc historical perspective you took in it, kind of walking through those different industrial revolutions, the Gilded Age, and some of the parallels you drew to the way you see industry today, at least as a private author. So I think that's a good segue into where you are now at the agency. So although you raise a lot of different issues in your book, and obviously have thought a lot about those issues, you did center now on privacy. So why do you think privacy is important, and what drew you to CalPrivacy in particular?
Yeah, I think privacy is so important because the information about each and every one of us is driving a lot of our economy, and that people are very frustrated that they don't have control over the usage of their personal information, and that if that information is leaked out or used in ways that it can have significant negative impact on people. It's not just being served ads, that I have people coming up to me and just like telling me about how their personal information was taken over by identity thieves, and like how it just completely, ruined their lives and all the time that it takes. And so there was a woman in Silicon Valley, kind of a family friend, and I hadn't seen her in a while. And then like, oh, what are you doing? I now work for the state of California. Well, let me tell you what happened when this happened, and people were submitting tax returns, with my personal information, and like, basically, why aren't you doing something, right? And so I think that this information about individuals can be weaponized against them and used against them, and their lives could be made miserable if people's personal information gets in the wrong hands. And we're also seeing, people's precise geolocation being sold to the government and being used to track people down. We're seeing that people are being potentially discriminated against in terms of pricing for goods and services based on their personal information, and that things that were in the past legal that are now illegal in some states, that potentially their personal information can be used to arrest them, right? So those were kind of the thoughts and themes that I had when writing the book. And I also felt that I wanted to do something, but also I felt that one of the things that I could add in this position is the perspective of actually building a company, being an entrepreneur, understanding to some extent the data economy. And the answer, oftentimes it's like, regulations, or maybe too many regulations or no regulations. And to me, it's like having good regulations that benefit and laws that benefit consumers, but are also easily operationalized by businesses. So one of the big areas of focus for me is making sure that whatever we do, that that we think through, that can, the stuff that we're trying to do from a regulation perspective, or when we look at laws that lawmakers come to us and say, well, what do you think as the privacy agent? Can it be operationalized by folks such as yourself? And does it really add value to everyday consumers? Is that if you're going to give people some maybe new rights, can they be able to exercise it at scale in a world in which people are dealing with, average consumers are dealing with dozens or hundreds or thousands of companies in the data economy?
That is a helpful perspective, and I'm going to have more questions about those operational elements of it soon. And I know you mentioned Liz Allen's going to be on talking about how the drop is being, the delete request and opt-out platform, how that's going to be operationalized. But sticking with the agency itself for a moment, I wanted to ask some questions about how the agency is structured and how it's maybe different from other privacy enforcement agencies. So the first thing I've heard you say before and emphasize that CalPrivacy is an independent agency. So I was hoping you could explain what that means and why you think it's important. Like, why is that worth emphasizing about CalPrivacy?
Yeah, so I wasn't appointed by Governor Newsom. The Prop 24 created a board, two of which are, including the chair, appointed by the governor, one by the AG, one by the Speaker, and one by the Senate Pro Tem leader. And so it's an independent board. They meet quarterly, and they appoint an executive director that does the day-to-day operations. And so, so I don't have to report into, I think probably if we were part of, part of the California government, and, I'd probably be working for Chopra, that was just put into that role. We would have probably been one of the agencies that are now under him as part of the reorganization, but we are independent. And that gives us some additional flexibility. For example, one of the things that Prop 24 says that, well, you can do policy and legislation in terms of advising not only the California legislature, but other jurisdictions. And we can also support as well as sponsor legislation. And most California government agencies don't actually support or sponsor legislation. And so that's why, like a week ago or so, I actually testified in front of a Vermont Senate committee on their data broker bill that we spent some good time with State Senator Maroney talking to him about SB 4. I'm here, obviously, with you guys in D.C., but spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill, talking about the Secure Data Act. And we've also signed international agreements with ICO, CNIL, the South Korean and Data Protection Agency, as well as we're members of the Global Privacy GPPA for Privacy Protection. I don't know what it is called. What it is, but so that's one kind of unique aspect. Our ability to be as active in policy and legislation that a typical attorney general is not. The other aspect that's probably pretty unique about us is the public affairs aspect. That the statute does mandate that we can go out there and evangelize to Californians, educate them about their privacy rights. So we've invested in a website which is privacy.ca.gov, trying to provide practical tips. If you are in California, you will be increasingly, for the next month or two, you'll be seeing a bunch of ads regarding the drop system. And historically, we've done other advertising, and then we spent a lot of time doing community stuff. So I've personally been in a lot of senior citizens' residences as part of this senior scam stoppers that other state agencies are doing. We're in Long Beach. There's the LGBTQ Pride race where we have a booth right there. We've been at universities, just trying to raise awareness and evangelize privacy. So we're very much trying to be active in the community in terms of community outreach. Obviously, we do regulations, we do enforcement, we share enforcement. And then the kind of the newer thing that we've added on, which was always in the regulation, is our new audits division. And so we've hired Sabrina Ross to be the state's first ever chief privacy auditor associated with the agency. And then the other thing is that through legislation that I worked with State Senator Becker on, SB 362, the California Delete Act, we were actually given responsibility for the data broker registry and building the accessible deletion mechanism on top of it as well. So to summarize, we do what other AGs do in terms of regulations, enforcement. I would say that we're probably more active than anyone else in those fronts in the United States. But then when you pair it with legislation, public affairs, as well as audits coming online, as well as the drop system, we're very much probably on the forefront of driving privacy in the United States.
So maybe you were being a bit modest when you said you're sticking to your knitting when this is pretty elaborate tapestry at
this is all based on, I'm not doing this because I like to do it. It's explicitly written in the ballot initiative for us to do that, right? And then in the case of the Delete Act, like for example, the chief privacy auditor and the executive director were explicitly called out in the actual statute. So we have to have those two people. And then obviously the drop system was through legislation.
Yeah, very broad remit. And I had some additional questions about some of those functions that you mentioned. I'd like to start with legislative affairs. You mentioned how you're working with other states and jurisdictions. I want to follow up on that, but could you also speak to current legislative initiatives that CalPrivacy is supporting in the state of California?
Well, today is a big day in California. This is where both the Senate and the Assembly Appropriations Committee meets and decides whether or not to cull 20 or 25%, and last year got up to 30% of bills. It's called the suspense file. I won't bore you with the details, but basically any piece of legislation that spends any amount of money, and I think the bar in the Senate is $50,000. I think it's like 100 or 150,000 in the Assembly. So some of the bills that I'll list out may not make it in a few hours. So it's a very interesting process that we have in California. But we are sponsored SB 923, which would align our CCPA right to delete with other states. And so instead of data, and also would align it with the Delete Act as well. So that's a bill that's being heard by the Senate Appropriations. We also support AB 1542, which is Assemblymember Ward's, that would ban the sale and sharing of sensitive personal information. That would put us in line with Maryland. So we are a supporter of that bill. There is a bill, AB 883, which is by Assemblymember Lowenthal, that basically would fast track elected officials and members of the judiciary in California in having their data deleted within 5 days within the drop system. We have a support, if amended, position on it. And I'm drawing a blank on maybe one or two. Oh, the Ward also has the ban of sale of geolocation data, and that we have a support position on that as well. So those are the bills. Last year, the big bill that was something that was a very high priority for me was AB 566, which is the California Opt-Me Out Act. And that requires browser vendors to add the opt-out preference signal by January 1st, 2027. That was incredibly high priority. And we were very pleased to see that that got passed. And then we also, and I actually had wrote this before I took the position, but SB 361 that amended the Delete Act to add more transparency. I worked again with Senator Becker on that. And then the agency had a support position on that bill. That passed. And we've actually implemented the requirements of SB 361 in the new data broker registry that was available, I think, in the April timeframe as well. So those are examples of legislations that we've either sponsored or supported. But sometimes we sponsor legislation and it doesn't make it through. And one of which was AB 2021. We wanted to add whistleblower program to the CCPA. We just kind of ran out of bandwidth on that, not bandwidth, but we ran out of time because it was kind of a big idea and it was hard for people to get their heads around, like, well, why should you have one specific to the CCPA? And we tried to argue, like, well, why don't we start with our privacy law, and then if it works, then maybe you can extend it to other aspects, other programs, other pieces of legislation, et cetera. But oftentimes it takes 1 year, it takes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for an idea such as that. So we'll probably take another bite of the apple for whistleblowers. And I'm really heartened to see that even at the federal level, Obernolte and Liu as part of their bipartisan AI bill, have actually whistleblower protections for artificial intelligence. So it's cool to see that kind of idea in other areas as well.
So sticking on AB 1542 for a moment, you said that would align California with Maryland that has a ban on sales of sensitive personal information. One thing I wanted to note is that the NAI has a different model for how some self-regulatory standards we have with our voluntary enhanced standards, where instead of an outright ban on sales of all types of personal information, we have very strict limitations for participating companies on how they use certain types of location data, and it's very focused on harms that we've anticipated and identified associated with specific points of interest. So going back to that perspective of matching a policy remedy to an identified harm, we tried to kind of thread the needle with that. But it seems like with AB 1542, there's a broader perspective of like, well, that needle threading exercise might be too hard. I'm wondering like what leads CalPrivacy to think that complete ban is a better policy outcome than a more tailored set of restrictions.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen is that even though we're the privacy agency, that oftentimes people come to us with fully baked bills and ideas that we haven't had any participation or contribution in. And it could be driven by other civil society groups or by the actual members themselves that just want that. And so we're kind of in a position that when something that's already ready-made, that's kind of handed to us, then it becomes more incumbent on us to say, okay, well, you really, really want this. And so, okay, well, here's some suggestions, here's some recommendations, et cetera. So kind of the evolution of 1542 was Assemblymember Ward had a ban on sale of geolocation. And that was kind of like completely ready-made, dropped in our lap. What do you guys think about this? And there was a bunch of civil society groups that were involved in that. And then what we then did is said, well, here's how you can better optimize that language, because it had all this language. I think even initially it was outside the CCPA, right? And then we said, well, here's how you can bring it into the CCPA and all that stuff. And then I kind of had a conversation with the legislative aide and said, well, really, there's other people that are doing something similar, like in Maryland, and they just flat out just ban the sale and sharing of sensitive personal information. And so I think the person kind of looked at me, kind of cocked his head, and then lo and behold, the next year there was the bill right there, and so at that point it was kind of out of our hands, and there was already civil society groups associated with it. So we certainly weren't. The concept in California is if you sponsor a bill, like you're very actively involved in writing it and being like the lead testifiers for that type of bill. And in this case, it was more like, well, because it's privacy, do you support it or not? And so we voted to support it. But we have to be very conscious and cognizant that you have very strong-willed people that just in the legislature, and God bless them for this, that want to do it their way, and so in that case, that was kind of the evolution from my perspective, and and basically in the end we were asked, would you support it, yes or no, and we were like, sure, we support it, but I think if you have problems with that approach, or you think there's a better approach, then certainly work directly with Assemblymember Ward, et cetera. So we support it, but we're not driving it. So okay, I'm not trying to be weasel my way out of it. I'm just simply telling you the evolution of this. I felt really good that we were able, with the geolocation bill, to get it into the CCPA as opposed to it being separate. And then it kind of and then it was a sidebar conversation, this is how Maryland does it. And then all of a sudden next year, we have this bill, AB 1542, and it's like, do you support it or not? And give us some comments. And it's like, well, if this is the path you want to go down, the way that you wrote it, would be fine. So we can't dictate or mandate. And the thing is that we're not the only entity proposing, privacy legislation. So if there's things that should be fixed or corrected or improved, et cetera, do what everyone else does, which is find an author, right? For this type of legislation. So a lot of the bills that are privacy related, don't come from us. Come from civil society groups, businesses, et cetera. And then at some point we're asked to weigh in, and they can just completely ignore, our comments and feedback. There's nothing requiring them or forcing them to listen to us.
That is a helpful perspective, and just a reminder to everyone to stay engaged. As he says, CalPrivacy is one stakeholder among others in the state legislature. Can I ask you a kind of a more specific question about what AB 1542 would require and not require, or are you not wanting to get into the weeds with that?
It's a simple, change. It's basically, I haven't read it in a while. It basically says you can't sell a share under the section having to do with limiting the sale of sensitive personal information. So
one thing that comes to mind for me is when you were talking about some of the privacy harms that motivate your work, and one of them you mentioned was the potential of personal information about citizens being shared with the government, potentially outside the context of a Fourth Amendment right. And that's something that the NAI has been focused on as well. We participated in a listening session with your board at the last board meeting on that topic. Our voluntary enhanced standards, our participants commit not to share with government for law enforcement purposes. I don't, necessarily want it to try to elicit a legal opinion out of you or anything, but there's been some questions in my mind, and I know in other folks in the industry, about whether a ban of sale of sensitive information to a third party, if third party, the way it's defined under CCPA, includes government entities, whether that's state, local, or federal government entities. And so again, I think that's a debatable question, but I'm wondering if you have a point of view on that outcome, if that were to be an outcome that sales would be banned, but potentially not to the government.
I don't have any comment on that. So
okay, thanks for listening. Yep. Okay. So sticking on legislation, I know we have so much to talk about. You also mentioned engagement outside of California. So obviously, there's a lot going on inside of California. There's a lot of cutting edge privacy legislation happening in California. You mentioned SB 4 in Connecticut, some engagement with Vermont. They're both. So Vermont is considering a Delete Act style data broker registry and associated accessible deletion mechanism. SB 4, same thing in Connecticut, a data broker registry plus an accessible deletion mechanism. That's actually passed the legislature and I think is widely expected to become law. Do you have anything you can say about how CalPrivacy would want to work with other jurisdictions looking to stand up accessible deletion mechanisms pursuant to their laws? Is there some kind of partnership that you're seeking? So you've been through the legislative process, but is that where it ends, or is there some further partnership that you would envision or desire to have with those other jurisdictions?
Yeah, we're very open to collaborating with other states as it relates to not only their privacy laws, but also the accessible deletion mechanism. So we're definitely very interested in ensuring that if there's other laws coming online, that there's harmonization. So we do look at what Maryland's doing. We look at Oregon, Connecticut, Virginia passed ban of sale of geolocation information, right? So we saw what Maryland's done with data minimization, et cetera. So, we definitely look at other states, and then oftentimes other states look at us and they say, well, we want to do what you're doing in California. And we encourage them to kind of, we encourage the coordination and synchronization and harmonization. Specific to the accessible deletion mechanism, I'm on record to say that we have no problems figuring out ways potentially to share the technology, which could potentially even include open sourcing it or other means and mechanisms. In the case of Vermont, they actually want to do a study. So if that does pass, then whoever's tasked with doing the study, we would certainly sit down with them and say, what are you looking for? Here are the various options, et cetera. So we've had conversations with at least a half a dozen states about the kind of the technical details of what we've done, and we're more than happy to figure out paths moving forward. That if we can provide soup starter or jump start for other states to implement something comparable, but we have to keep in mind that our time and effort is we got to figure out the right way that we're not charging either the taxpayers with our time or cutting into the data broker fees that are paid to us, which are focused on building the California system that are not going elsewhere as well. So we got to have to balance what the regulations, the statute, and the laws call for in terms of how we spend our time, where we spend our time, et cetera. But we do have it in the actual statute that we are supposed to do this collaboration with other states and to promote synchronization, harmonization, et cetera. And we're very glad to do that.
And I've heard from companies that if we're going to have additional states that have accessible deletion mechanisms, there's a lot of interest in having alignment with the technical standards and the infrastructure, so that we're, as you mentioned, operationalization being a key consideration. That's something our companies are very interested in. So you have our support for that to the extent that there's willingness to do it.
100%.
Okay, so I think the last, I didn't want to bury the lead here, but the last question about legislation and what the legislative function, we're here in Washington, D.C. The Secure Data Act is now a bill. We heard from Representative Joyce last night at our reception, speaking to all the benefits that he sees in that bill. But my understanding is that CalPrivacy does not support the bill in its current form. Could you talk about how you view CalPrivacy's engagement at the federal level and your perspective on the Secure Data Act?
Yeah, I mean, we have an open door policy to meet with anyone and everyone, and that extends to everyone. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and just say, hey, saw you speak. I will connect with you. And then if it warrants, obviously you probably want to have it flow through you, Tony, and David, but more than happy to have conversations with everyone here, and similarly, I've been here. This is my third time in DC in the last, 4 months or so, maybe a little bit, 5 months, meeting with folks on Capitol Hill. What I've found is that a lot of people don't understand what the state of play is at the state level. And oftentimes we see proposals that kind of mimic, the state of art of 2018, and they don't understand how rapidly things have evolved at the state level. So we do oppose the Secure Data Act, and for a number of reasons, and we put forth a letter. But at a high level, we're not big fans of federal laws that preempt states, just flat out. And I can give you 5 or 6 reasons why that's not a good thing. But the fundamental issue, there's a number of issues with this current proposal, one of which is that it seriously and significantly strips away rights that people enjoy today. So we talked briefly about the opt-out preference signal. There's now 12 states that support it, over 100 million people. California is requiring browser vendors to add that as a switch. That all gets blown away. So if you're in one of the 12 states that can use an opt-out preference signal, you would lose that right. Obviously, there's 40 million people in California. I don't know how many people in Connecticut. They have or will have the Delete Act. That gets blown away. We stop through both legislation as well as regulation. Dark patterns, go for it with the Secure Data Act. And then obviously there's issues with their purpose limitation, data minimization, and I just would point you to General Motors as great examples of how we're collaborating with other state agencies as well as local district attorneys to really focus on that. So that's not there. There's issues with the cure period, no private right of action that we have as it relates to data breaches. So the list goes on. But the fundamental issue is that, it's the call for preemption, and that's a showstopper for us.
Okay, so it sounds like, as you just said, preemption is the sticking point. So there's, like you said, there's kind of a long list of things that you think could be different about that law, but even if they were different, preemption would still be a showstopper?
Yes.
Okay, let me ask then, is there anything you like about the law? Did they get anything? The balance of scales we already know, but is there anything you like about it?
Is there anything you like about it besides preemption?
No comment.
No, I mean, look, we like having conversations, and we like having collaborations. We like having meeting of the minds, right? And, and so I think the process is very interesting, in which, it's not something that, there was an engagement, with other voices, to make things better, right? And even if in the end there was a sticking point on preemption, this is a very low ceiling that's being set, right? And you just say to yourself, like, why don't they have, why don't they do more when it comes to data dark patterns? What's the deal with this rolling 45-day cure? You can just kind of go down the whole list as well. And so I think I try very hard to listen to everyone. And I would think that's just a good approach and strategy, which is to build bridge, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, and it makes for stronger rules, regulations, laws, et cetera.
And I was joking a bit about no comment. I think that one thing I could say for the Secure Data Act is that you call it a floor, but I kind of think of it in terms of a common denominator, that they, even though they're not capturing every element that diverges among state laws, we hear state regulators talk about harmonization a lot. There are some real elements of harmonization. I see the Secure Data Act as kind of focusing at least on those as a common denominator. But understood, I encourage folks to read Executive Director Kemp's letter. I think there's a lot in there to consider. So again, I wish we had 2 hours, but we don't. So I'm going to try to move on to another topic that's kind of related to the regulatory function at CalPrivacy and the current preliminary rulemaking activities you're undertaking around opt-out preference signals and reducing consumer friction and exercising choices. You've emphasized how important the Opt-Me-Out Act is. You've talked about bringing consumer rights to scale through that and through the delete request and opt-out platform, the drop. One thing that comes to mind for me as I look at this, and I'll just give a little bit of commentary on this. I've been paying attention to policy discussions over the last few years that to me sound like declaring notice and choice dead. They're saying it's too hard, it's too complicated, consumers can't understand what's going on, you can't effectively give them notice, you can't effectively give them choice. So what we should be looking to is more like bans, like 1542, stricter data minimization. I've heard of proposals around data fiduciary duties for businesses. So there's all these different models that are being discussed, or I've heard discussed in recent years. But now I feel like, California's coming roaring back with built-in opt-out preference signals in every browser, delete request and opt-out platform available for all California consumers for free. Is it long-lived notice and choice?
Well, we have that paradigm, and one of the big areas of my focus is to enable privacy at scale. I call it Let's Make Privacy Easy. This was something that I was passionate before taking this role, and this was one of the motivations for me to join, that I could influence this. And obviously, I helped jumpstart the Delete Act. I was very pro global privacy control, opt-out preference signal. So one of the highest priorities that I had when I joined was not only making sure that drop was properly implemented, but also to really put a lot of wood behind the arrow on AB 566, build a coalition beyond privacy civil society groups to get AB 566 passed to have this added. Obviously, we had to make some compromises, and so I was willing to do that by dropping mobile from the bill and just requiring browsers to do that. And also very much focused on launching a campaign to educate consumers on their privacy rights and how they can enable them. So a very simple thing we did is that consumers don't understand what a CPPA is, or what's the California Privacy Protection Agency. So one of the first priorities was give us a friendlier name. Wearing my marketing hat, right? CalPrivacy, right? Well, so we're California. We do privacy. It seems very simple, but for 4 years we were, part of this alphabet soup of CPPA, CPRA, CCPA, et cetera. And then also we have this privacy.ca.gov website, but it doesn't actually tell Californians what to do in terms of actual things that they can do in 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes to have kind of a one-stop shopping for what are the top privacy tips and enhancements. And by the way, we link to some of the stuff that you guys have done.
We appreciate that. Yeah, we work hard on those resources.
It's great. No, I mean, so we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And so what we're trying, I don't know if I can, as part of the agency, kind of break the current model that we have, notice and choice, the opt-out, whatever you want to call it. Solov calls it the individual control model or something like that. I forget what he calls it. But he does articulate that the reality today for consumers, it's a never-ending set of chores that you have to exercise, right? And so and here we are in a world of AI and automation, scale, et cetera. And so one of the big areas of focus of what I'm trying to do is to make privacy easy, enable privacy rights, the exercise of privacy rights at scale. And our arsenal is DROP. Our arsenal is AB 566. And then we're going to educate the crap out of having people tell people how to turn it on in browsers starting January 1st, 2027. We are going in and beefing up the privacy.ca.website and even going to merge the cppa.ca.gov website with privacy.ca so we get more traffic to that one place. When you sign up for Drop, you can click a box. Do you want a newsletter? It's amazing that we're now at 300,000 signups of Drop, and over a third of the people have signed up for our newsletter. So if we pretty soon, give it a year, give it 2 years, we may have 1 million Californians getting monthly, bi-monthly, whatever, how we don't want to spam them, but newsletters about how to exercise their privacy as well. So we're trying to work in the constraints of this system. At the same time, we're trying to figure out, is there legislation that we can support or even sponsor that further streamlines and operationalize privacy? But I also want to tell everyone in this room is that if you look at the public comments, that part of the public comments that we ask in these new areas is how can we make it easier for you, right? And so, for example, one of the things is we want to streamline the notices process, right? We ask questions about, gosh, you're dealing with all these authorized agents. Is there a way that we can better regulate those authorized agents to make it easier and better and make things more efficient? So those are things that I think about every day, right? And we are also in the process of trying to publish, Alan mentioned interpretive guidance. We are going to come out with very detailed guidance as it relates to ADMT, risk assessment, and cybersecurity audits. And we have people like Liz walking you through kind of the requirements for the drop regulations as well. So there's the education aspect of it as well. So we want to operationalize privacy not only for consumers, but make it easy for businesses, because if businesses can easily implement privacy, then consumers will benefit from it.
Yeah, both elements are key. And I wanted to go back to something that you said as you were going through that explanation, which is you want to educate consumers about opt-out preference signals and how to turn it on. And that really stuck with me, because I will say that one of the concerns that I've heard is that there are cases even in the market today for browsers that have, to their credit, gotten ahead of regulation by putting opt-out preference signals, or GPC in particular, global privacy control, native to their browser. But they've implemented it in a way where there isn't a clear way, at least from my perspective, to turn it on. So it seems more like a business product design choice and less a consumer preference. So I don't want to impose that point of view on you, but I do wonder whether when you say turn it on, if you see a distinction to be made there between a product design decision and a consumer preference.
Yeah, I mean, so we went out and asked for comments, and you guys did a great job, and we've had follow-on conversations with you guys. And so we want to make sure that that as it relates to opt-out preference signals, that the intent of the consumer is respected, and also not necessarily maybe the platform desires, that the consumer intent is the most important thing, as opposed to, the preferences of the companies that may be facilitating delivery of the signal. So that's something that it's in the statute, and we're going to look to make sure we're going to carefully consider that. But at the end of the day, we're in listen mode and trying to get as much feedback, because we do know that this will enable opt-out preference signals at a much higher volume than we've had in the past. And so this is something that we're actively looking at, getting feedback, and more than happy. We haven't formally started the regulatory process, so if you guys want to have discussions with me, feel free to connect on LinkedIn, and we can set up a meeting, and you can guys give me a brain dump on what your thoughts are on this.
We really appreciate the agency's level of engagement. I do want to say that from my perspective, you've always been all ears, and you've told me that you've read our comment letter personally, and that means a lot to us, that we put, us and our members put a lot of thought into them, and we really appreciate how much you return the effort in trying to consider the points that we're making, and appreciate your attention to that distinction between a platform setting and a consumer preference. NAI has been very supportive of GPC as an expression of authentic consumer choice. We put out our own browser extension to try to provide a model for how we think that works well. So really appreciate your attention to that distinction. And I also wanted to kind of go all the way back, maybe to the start of our conversation for a minute, because this is another element of this, about how much it matters how browsers implement this. You said that you're not a competition regulator, you're a privacy regulator. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I think there are definitely, it's unavoidable that there are going to be some competition impacts based on privacy choices and privacy design choices in particular. So the CCPA does say, I'm going to just quote, it's section 185. It's the enabling provisions for regulations. It does say
185-19. Yes.
You know it better than I do. And I think what was striking to me there is it does read to me like an instruction or a suggestion, at the very least, that the agency consider a certain competition element when it's writing regulations on OOPS, which is that OOPS shouldn't be implemented in a way that unfairly disadvantages another business. Can you say anything about how you understand that provision, or how that will go into the rulemaking process?
We're very familiar with that, and at the end of the day, we will, we'll stick to our knitting. We'll implement what the statute calls forth. So just look at 185-19, and I think again, the CCPA is a privacy law. There's not that much about competition in it. I mean, the purposes and intent talk about competition in the context of every business has to transparently provide a notice of the information, and that gives the consumers. There is data portability, right? And I think Lowenthal has a bill about portability. So you could say that's also involves competition. There's 185.19 about OOPS. But beyond that, that's kind of the extent as it relates to competition. And the overall theme of the CCPA is all businesses have, it's a level playing field. There's no distinction between first party and third party. It's just everyone needs to follow the actual rules itself. There have been proposals in California, which I can't weigh in on, but I look at them like Wiener had a bill about anti-preferencing that didn't make it, but I did write about that in my book, right? And there's the Compete, I think called the Compete Act. So there's other things that are there that if your members or NAI are very concerned about competition, that there's other vehicles that I would encourage citizens, civil society groups, businesses to work with receptive members in the California legislature to potentially have them, implemented or seen through as proposed bills.
Yeah, it is helpful to hear that there are other avenues to pursue, and that going to the privacy regulator primarily for competition concerns, I can understand your point of view on that. I did think it was an interesting comment on the first and third party distinction. I mean, definitely that's a competitive issue, but it strikes me that privacy laws in California do treat first and third parties differently, and I'm kind of reminded of how the ADMT regulations played out in that regard. I'm kind of just like calling back a little bit here, but there was a proposal at one point to add behavioral advertising as a definition in the ADMT proposals. Is that ringing a bell for you? I don't want to go too far.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work had been done, and I kind of joined like at the end. I did think I had some influence on it, but obviously in the end, this is supported and has to be voted on by our board. Then it goes through the Office of Administrative Law. But I know exactly what you're talking about, that behavioral advertising got cut.
And that would have applied an opt-out to advertising using first-party data as opposed to sale and share for
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case, I'm very proud of the fact that our ADMT regulations are the most robust than anywhere in the United States. Same thing can be said about our risk assessment, cybersecurity audits. But as you kind of work through it, sometimes things get cut. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't opportunities down the road for us to revisit those things. And so if you guys have a punch list of things as it relates to any of these regulations, more than happy to hear it out. One thing that we've learned is that we tried that in the past, it was this huge omnibus set of regulations, and it took 4 years, although I've had so many people in industry say they so much prefer the regulation process in California because they can have a constant dialogue and they can constantly weigh in, and there's all these steps, as opposed to sometimes they don't like the legislative process, that sometimes they feel things can get fast-tracked and there isn't really an opportunity for them to be heard and all that stuff. But, that's just the nature of the beast with legislation. So what we're trying to do as it relates to regulations is trying to come up with little mini speedboats as opposed to big battleships. And that gives us a little bit more flexibility. And so right now, the focus on regulations are, obviously we have to do the drop audit because that's required. And then we're looking at how we can reduce friction, which includes how you guys can more efficiently process DSARs, work better with authorized agents, et cetera. So there's a business aspect to that. The streamlining of notices, that's important. We want to make businesses more efficient. Do we need any more clarification when it comes to employees? And then obviously because of AB 566, trying to get clarification, and not everything's implemented in the regulations vis-a-vis the statute as it relates to opt-out preference signals. So we're trying to kind of catch up on that. So we're working on those things. But as it relates to fixing, improving, enhancing, optimizing ADMT, risk assessment, cybersecurity, audits, we're all ears on that as well. So
that's great to hear. And I think I literally talked about only half of the things I wanted to ask you about. So I really do wish we had 2 hours. We didn't talk about enforcement, but I think we'll put a pin in that. Obviously, everyone knows GM happened. PlayOn is another recent decision. We probably don't have time to go into those in detail, but I do want to kind of call back to a couple of years past. And thank you again for having CalPrivacy engage with the NAI every year. I mean, for the past 3 years, we had Mike Macko, and we talked a lot about enforcement last year. 2 years ago, your predecessor, Ashkan Soltani, joined us at our summit. And I wanted to call back to something that when I was interviewing him 2 years ago, we were talking about CalPrivacy in terms of a startup organization, because it went from words on a page in Prop 24 to a functioning agency within a couple of years under his leadership. And that was kind of what the conversation was about. How did you go from 0 to 1? Based on again, we couldn't cover half the things that you've been up to in an hour. It's not a startup agency anymore. So I'm wondering if you could speak to, kind of as we close out here, what's your perspective on the agency today? And also what are your ambitions for it over the next few years?
Yeah. So there's that quote in The Sun Also Rises, which is a character's talking about bankruptcy. It's gradually, then suddenly. And oftentimes I like to think that we're almost like a thing that shoots a big boulder into a lake or the ocean, and a catapult. And it may take a long time before the wave hits. And sometimes the wave doesn't hit as well. So if you look at the GM thing, that well before I showed up in 2023, there was this initiative to look at connected cars. And then people said, oh, look what you did with Honda and Ford. It was really just about their website, opt-outs. But now you saw with GM what we were able to do. If you look at at least what I was working on with Senator Becker, it was 2022, 2023. We were talking about data brokers. Now we've actually gone live, but the deletions haven't begun. So there's a lot of boulders that we've thrown into the proverbial ocean right now that I have that may not come to shore. You may not see for 2-3 years down the road as well. So that's just kind of the nature of government. But the ability to have significant impact is dramatic when that suddenly does occur. So, things of focus that we do want to build out the audit function, and we will start doing audits this year, right? And we've hired Sabrina. We've building out the team, and that will make us more proactive versus reactive, that you have enforcement that will look for compliance as opposed to violations. So that's something that we're excited about. We're going to continue down the path of trying to make privacy easy. We're going to look to see if there's additional legislation or regulations to streamline, optimize things as well. So yeah, I think just kind of trying to make privacy easy for you guys as well as consumers is kind of the overriding theme. But there are things in the works that we're focusing on and building, but it'll probably be 2-3 years from now that you'll really start to see them. But you can kind of just imagine what we've done with connected cars, what we've done with data brokers and Delete Act. These things take time, but that's kind of the nature of government.
All right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of the Monopoly Report podcast. That was Tony Ficarrotta, General Counsel of the NAI, interviewing Tom Kemp of CalPrivacy. I'll be back to my regular programming next week, and am pleased to announce that I'll be interviewing Cindy Cohn of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We'll talk about Cindy's fantastic book, Privacy's Defender. And because I can't help myself, we'll talk a bit about the Bay Area music scene over the years. And I'll get Cindy's reaction to a number of issues impacting the digital media space. This will be a fantastic discussion. Meanwhile, please subscribe to the show at monopoly-report.com or on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thanks for listening.
Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times.